Welcome to this Nexa Wednesday. My name is Carlos De Martin. I'm the co-director of the Nexa Center, and my other co-director, Professor Marco Ricolfi, sends his regard to our guest and to all of you. He's a law professor. And as usual, before starting our meetings, I introduce myself, and then I will ask all of you to do a brief introduction of yourself. This meeting is webcast live. This is a microphone, and that's a webcam. And the recording will be online on our YouTube channel, so be aware of that. So let's do a quick roundtable, and then I will introduce our distinguished guest, Antonio.
I am Antonio Sant'Angelo. I am a semiotician, philosopher, and I work as the executive director of the Nexa Center.
Okay, Marco.
Marco Conoscenti, PhD student. My focus is on blockchain, Bitcoin.
You want to say a few more words since we have a computer scientist for a change?
Yes. I don't know if you know something about blockchain. My focus is the Lightning Network, which is a network of payments built on top of Bitcoin, which has some criticalities. So I developed a simulator, and I still have a simulator of this network to study its
stability.
Yes, exactly.
Another computer scientist?
Yes, my name is Antonio Vetro. I'm a software engineer. I worked for several years in the field of software quality and data quality. Recently, I'm trying to use this experience in a subject that is quite close, which is fairness of algorithms and bias in data. And I enjoy this topic together with the other Antonio, because he gives me a perspective which is not only technical, and we work pretty good together. At the same time, I do research in another center here at Politecnico, which is called the Future Urban Legacy Lab. It is driven by architects, and it mixes experiences from several departments, engineering department in Politecnico. I will tell you more at the dinner about that.
Thank you.
I'm an anthropology student of the university, and I'm here because I'm interested in the relationship between infrastructure and space in the human context.
I'm Denise Buzzalena. I'm studying communication, and I'm doing an internship here at Nexa Center.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's time to introduce our speaker. The title of his talk will be Understanding Cybergeography, Visualizing on Cyberspace and Geopolitics Interact, which is a very ambitious and beautiful title. Professor Kavé Salamatian, actually we got to know each other during a actually forward-looking European project, which was Internet Science, which was a network project bringing together, I don't know, 30 or something like that, entities in Europe, trying to foster internet science. That is exactly what we're trying to do at Nexa Center and elsewhere in the last 10, 15 years. And that was an exciting project, and ever since we remain in touch, occasionally interacting. And ever since then, we were talking about inviting him back to the Nexa Center to give a talk, so finally we managed. And thank you for coming. He's a full professor of computer science at the University of Savoie. His main interests are internet measurement and modeling. Actually, we also interacted, I think, for Neobot, our software for that we used to have at the time, network security and networking information theory. He previously was at Lancaster University and also the University Pierre and Marie Curie. Kavé, you pronounce it Kavé, right?
Yes,
Kavé, with an accent, Kavé.
Yes.
Has graduated from the University of Paris, Sud d'Orsay, where he worked on joint source channel coding, applied to multimedia transmission over the internet, which was also my former topic. And in a former life, also he had an experience with an MBA. Wow, I didn't know that. And worked as a on the market floor as a risk analyst Wow, I didn't know that. Kavé, you never told me. Is currently distinguished visiting professor of the Chinese Academy of Science and working also with the French National Defense Institute. Recipient of a Chinese Academy Science Presidential Award, and working these days on figuring out if networking is a science or just a hobby, and if it is a science, what are the fundamentals. This today at the Nexa Center is been more talking about cyber strategy, cyber geography, and the interaction between internet and society, especially the impact of large-scale artificial intelligence. He has written a book on a comparative analysis of nationwide strategy of artificial intelligence, which will be published very soon,
So
right?
yes, very soon.
Okay, excellent.
We have sent we are in the ping pong game with the editor.
Okay, that's very
correcting.
interesting. Keep us posted. So it's with great pleasure that I am giving the mic, and welcome back to the Nexa Center.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be there. I have known Nexa Center for a long time, and Nexa Center is a good place for the topic that we are going to discuss, because it's one of these rare number of places in Europe where you have real interdisciplinary research over internet studies that are happening. So let me give a little more detail about my background and tell you how I get into this presentation. I am, by education, a computer scientist. I will even say an electronic engineer, and for a long time I have been working on very technical issues related to networking, routing, security, network security, network measurement, modeling, mathematical modeling, and so on. And because I had the occasion during my education to have this MBA and to be in touch with some people that had a more human science view of the issues. I did my master thesis during my MBA on the application of Sun Tzu strategy to marketing. I was completely persuaded and completely aware that the technical issues that we are discussing when we talk about internet are not only technical, and they have a deep strategic and geopolitical meaning. For a long time, I was seen as an odd person by my colleagues in computer science that were saying, why do you need to go and talk with these people in the other building next side of the street? In my experience, crossing a street in a campus is more difficult than crossing a river infested by crocodile. But there was always this comment, and my presentation will try to convince you, if you are not already convinced, that there is a lot of benefit to look in a multidisciplinary setting to issues, and there is more than benefit. It's mandatory to do it if you want to have enough understanding. So, I'm going to talk about cyber geography. Let's get very fast on the topic. These days you're hearing a lot of war drama. Cyber war. Every countries have their own cyber army, and we are hearing a lot of people talking about cyber security and so. And what is quite interesting for me, and this is the reason that I have this picture of the Indian, is that all in all, even if we are talking about very new tools and new technical artifact, the imageography that built for defining war and the dehumanization of the adversary is still ongoing in this same domain. Once upon a time, we were showing the Indian with a knife and going to kill you, or the communists with their knife in there. And nowadays, the new Indian is the hacker with his cap and his view and so on. So it gives me an introduction about the topic that I would like to describe and I am working on these days, which is cyber strategy. So if I want to define what is cyber strategy, I can go in any book, or you go to Wikipedia or anywhere and you search for a definition of what is the meaning of strategy. You will see this definition that's quite generic, which said that strategy is the art of positioning, commanding, directing, coordinating forces in space in order to attain objectives. So if I want to define cyber strategy in this context, I would say that cyber strategy is the art of positioning, commanding, directing, coordinating cyber force in cyberspace in order to attain cyber objectives. Now, indeed, there is a lot of ill-defined terms there. What's the space of cyberspace? What are cyber objectives? What are cyber forces? How to position, command, direct, coordinate these forces? And this is overall the topic of the discussion of cyber strategy. And behind that, there is this very fundamental question, which is it anything new under the sun? Humanity had a long history of conflictuality. Do the cyber bring something new? Is it something new that we should take into account, or is it just business as usual? And for me, the very nice description of this business as usual is this nice sequence that you have in Odyssey 2001 by Kubrick, where you have these monkeys that are fighting with each other, and at some point of time, one monkey just throw his a piece of wood or a bone, throw it toward the sky, and it translated, morph into a satellite. Is it the issues that we are talking about cyber strategy, not just an extension of the bone that were used by monkeys in all time? First of all, we should take into account that this is the characteristic of networks, and all networks that we have seen in history, that these networks at the same time have been very important source of exchange and expansion, and very big source of benefit. But at the same time, they have been major source of risk and conflictuality. So if I want to give an example, up to my knowledge and study, the largest risk that we have in contemporary history in terms of percentage of casualty that they generate had been the Black Plague in Europe in the 14th century that killed something like 40% of European people. And the invasion of Genghis Khan in Middle East that killed 60% of the Middle East people. And both of them come from Silk Road. That is a very good example of network. But at the same time, the humanity that we know nowadays, the human that we know nowadays will not be this human if Silk Road was not existing. Meaning that networks comes with opportunities and major risk. It's quite interesting to see that the first cyber attack that we know in history has happened in 19th century during the secession war in US, in America, where the Southeast force attacked telegraph poles used by the North Army to transfer message and coordinates. And the second cyber attack that we know in history happened 3 months after, thousands of miles apart in the steppe of Siberia, where the Tatar force did the same to the Russian force. And it shows that how the speed of spread of cyber issues and the speed that enable networks when you build them. So, networks comes with opportunity that are economic and strategic, but also with risk. So indeed, Internet is one major network. I should update these numbers. They are not correct. We have now 50 years of ARPA, 35 years of TCP/IP, 14 years of Facebook. Now, sometime in my class, even graduate class, when I asked students, do you remember the time that Facebook was not there? Most of them will not remember that time, and it's kind of prehistoric time. But still, we have only 14 years of Facebook, but network has existed for thousands of years. And there is one network that I like very much because it has a huge impact on humanity. And like internet, it was transporting data. It's a network of human migration. So human migration was transporting data in form of DNA with very specific protocols for transferring data that might be more interesting than TCP/IP. But you have a lot of other networks, the network of Roman road, the network of Indian railways. So, before getting into understanding what is cyberspace and what is cyber strategy, there is this basic fundamental question that we can ask. What's a network? So, it seems to be a trivial question because everybody is using network and every community will have its own definition. But the network phenomenon is so universal that they should be worthy to have a kind of it's worthy to have a kind of analytic approach to figure out what is the real meaning of network and what is fundamental in networks. So the challenge will be, can we make a generic definition of network that integrate all type of networks, letting enough freedom for each network and each community to express its difference? We did this exercise in the context of the Eins network of excellence that Juan Carlos described described before. We talked with different community and we had some interview with them and tried to get into a definition of this. I'm not going to describe all the steps that we ended up. For example, there was a lot of discussion about is having a network is equivalent to having a graph to represent the phenomenon. And the answer to this is no, because you have, if you talk with a sociologist, it will say that a network is a situation, and you cannot split this situation into point-to-point relationships. Some other people were saying, so what you do with, is there any difference between network that transport information and network that are just logistic network and transport good and energy? So I'm going to discuss a little about this when I will make the definition. So after a lot of discussion, we ended up with this tentative definition, generic and universal definition of a network, that says that a network consists of a set of distributed elements that are cooperating to exchange information. So what are the main important keywords there? Cooperating and exchanging information for this cooperation. So, all in all, the center of a network is in fact to figure out what is the cooperation that is happening over this network and what are the information that are exchanged to do this cooperation. Indeed, you can say that, let's suppose that I take the metro or the network of a tramway in Torino. There is no information that is transferred. There's people that are transferred through it, but no clear information. The answer will be that for this network to emerge, there was before an information network that was enabling people to know that there are some people living in this place of the city that make the decision, that lead to making the decision to build the network. Meaning that a network can only grow and evolve when there is an information network that is backing it. Sometimes the information network disappears and the network gets ossified and is not anymore able to grow. But if you want to understand the dynamic of a network, you have to take into account the information network that is in the back. So, if I use this definition, I would say that internet is a network that strictly exchanges information in Shannon terms, and is made for exchanging information in Shannon terms. So internet main cooperation is there for information, for exchanging bits of information. Indeed, somebody can say that, so when my grandmother sees the picture of her grandson, and they get some feeling about it, this is also transferred through internet. But internet is not transferring the feeling, it's transferring the bits, and it's the human that is transforming these bits into emotion. So, this definition of network will be used as a kind of baseline that I'm going to use for defining cyberspace. So, how can I define cyberspace in this context? You want me to go back to?
Thank you. No, because I like very much the definition, so I want to remember it.
I will anyway give you the slides.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, how to define cyberspace? We said that a network is the most important element to look when we want to analyze a network, any network, is the cooperation that is happening and the information that are exchanged. So I'm going to define cyberspace as the space of possible cooperation that happen on top of internet. In fact, internet is itself into the cyberspace because internet is built over a set of lower layer cooperation. For having internet, you should have cooperation between different operators that have decided to exchange packets, and they have built an infrastructure for doing it. So, in fact, network is a nested, cyberspace is a nested set of interaction cooperation. And if we want to understand contemporary work, contemporary world, we have to understand this nested set of interaction and cooperation. Because nowadays, a characteristic of contemporary world is that the speed of emergence of new systems that are there to answer new cooperation need and generate new type of cooperation that will need new type of systems. This loop, this positive feedback loop, is going to be faster and faster. And if I want to give an example, once upon a time we built internet as a network for transferring packets. Later we built web as a new type of cooperation on top of it. And on top of web we built social network as another cooperation that was using, as another information exchange that was using the cooperation of lower layer, and so on and so forth. So you have a kind of very much nested set of elements, which is quite complex to take into account. I would say that maybe one reference to try to understand this is to go to Borges and Aleph, his view of this world that is inside another world and so on. So, when we want to understand the cyberspace, we have to understand this set of nested cooperation. And this set of nested cooperation is also very important to take into account, because if you want to attack any level of this, it's enough to attack one of the underlying cooperation. So this nestedness of the cooperation is at the same time the force, because you don't need to rebuild everything from scratch. You are building your application, your cooperation based on information that are coming from lower layer. But at the same time, you can do easily cyber attack by just targeting one lower layer and completely unnesting, unwinding this full structure. So I'm going to use this definition of cyberspace, and I will try in the forthcoming to go into understanding how I can represent this. So, indeed, network is, cyberspace is social, because all in all, network is connecting human, and the human are using the tools and the services that are provided into the cyberspace to build social contacts. Indeed, there is this very fundamental question, which is that do social contact or social interaction change over this network, and how these two interact, how the social need interact with the structure of the application and the structure of the internet, and how the structure of the internet shape back the structure of social interaction. And it goes very much into this discussion that you were discussing is one of your interests, research interest, which is ethic of algorithm, or ethic or regulation of algorithm, which is taking into account the fact that the existence of a computer system is also changing the environment that is around. I have no time to discuss this, but there is a very fascinating discussion to do about the fact that initially computers were seen to be oracle that answer to questions, but nowadays computers are systems that when they get somewhere, they tame their environment and they push the people to use what is provided by the API and the system, which is what I call the dictatorship of API. Indeed, this social interaction need to have application, and this is the part that I'm talking about. The API application, in fact, shape the way that the social interaction are happening, and the social need also shape the way that applications are built. You have indeed, for constructing this application, you have networks. And networks are connected through physical means, servers, routes, so. And at the lower layer, because I'm using this nested view, so it's a kind of recursive view, you need to have a fixed point somewhere. You have at the lower level the physical hardware. That even if we have the feeling that internet is a very vaporous or virtual space, these servers, this hardware should be positioned somewhere in the space. So, internet and cyberspace are a combination of all these components that I said. Now let's get to the topic that we will develop in the forthcoming. Can we define a cartography of cyberspace? Can we map it? Can we represent it? Why do we need to represent it? On one perspective, computer scientists that have built the internet have a clear idea about what it is. They have such a clear idea that they have built its nuts and bolts and all its components. Why do we need to have representations? On one hand, one motivation for representation is that more and more we have to interact with group of people that are not educated, that are not knowing, that are not knowledgeable about all the detail of the computer systems. And even more, they do not need to be knowledgeable about it. For example, nowadays, if you want to talk about cybersecurity, you will have to talk with politicians. And you cannot expect that politicians or even military know all the detail of the implementation of an IP stack. So you need to develop tools that enable you to interact with this community of decision-making people and build representation. This is one objective. The second objective is that we are used to think spatially. So making spatial representation is also helping us into understanding the issues. And there is a third objective that is there, is that I'm going a little more into the detail of it, which is that representing the cyberspace enable us to understand the world. And understanding the world enable us to understand the cyberspace and better represent it. So, there is 3 possible frameworks for representing cyberspace. A first framework is that all in all, as I say, components that are running the cyberspace, the server, the cables, the routers, the data centers are positioned somewhere in geography, they are positioned somewhere in space. So by representing this artifact that builds the internet over a map, we are having a first understanding of what's happening. So it is a first framework that is quite obvious, but as you will see, even with this obvious thing, we begin to have a lot of very interesting insights that are not so trivial. The second framework is that more and more real world is projecting itself into the cyberspace. And more we are interacting with this projection. Meaning that looking at the projection of the real world into cyberspace give you a lot of information about what is happening in real world. A very simplistic example is the fact that nowadays if you want to find an address in a city, you are not going to look at the plates that are right in the street. You are going to look at what your GPS is saying, and the GPS is in fact a projection of the real world into the cyberspace. The fact that there is more and more this projection of the real world into the cyberspace by itself is a fascinating area of study, both from philosophical perspective and ethical or practical perspective. The fact that we are less and less interacting with the real world and more interacting with this virtual world, and the projection generate a lot of issues. For example, one way of looking at the fake news issue is to say that by looking more and more on what is happening in the cyberspace, we are losing our relationship with reality, and losing the relationship with the reality enable fake news propagation to go much stronger and much faster. So the second framework is to take into account that not only the cyberspace is embedded in geography, but geography is more and more embedded into the cyberspace. And there is a third framework that is to accept or to look at the cyberspace as a space on its own and ask ourselves the question, how can we represent this interaction and this cooperation that were in the base of the cyberspace by itself? How can we represent this cooperation separately or independently from the geography or the real world? So, let's look at each one of this framework, and I'm going to give you some example of maps or insight that we can get from each one of these. So, first framework is that cyberspaces can be seen as embedded in geography. Cyberspace cannot exist without physical equipment and concrete infrastructure that are deployed in the geographical space. You have cable, server, data center, exchange point, NOC, everything. This artifact depend on their geographical environment, in particular on their physical, political, and economic constraint that exists in their physical environment. And this sentence that seems to be trivial is not so trivial, because not a long time ago, we were still believing that government have no impact on internet. They cannot do anything. Yes, indeed, they can do something, because the artifacts are somewhere in the space and they have a control of the space. The fact that these artifacts are in the space, they have a control on the space, but they have also their projection, their view about what the space should be and what should be the internet in their space. Getting into discussion about digital sovereignty and all of this. So, the fact that these artifacts are in space lead to a lot of interesting discussion. So I'm going to describe you two small case studies. One case study is territory planning and spatial inequality, which is a very classical geography issue, and transposing it into the cyberspace dimension. And the second one that is going to be a little longer is an analysis, is a risk analysis of internet connectivity between Europe and Asia. And there I'm going to have a more geopolitical approach. So let's get a map where I show the major IXPs in France and Italy. And I show the amount of traffic that they attract. And being Italian, something should strike you on the Italian map.
Nothing is in the suit.
Napoli is the border of Italy. And even if we will see later, when I will look at cables, all the cables are arriving in Sicily and the south of Italy. There is no major IXP and no major data center in the south. Indeed, you can say that data center are somewhere that there is industry, there is an economy, and so. But still, looking just at this map should raise questions for policy developer in the country. Indeed, this map is not updated. It has been made 3-4 years ago. Maybe there are some change in these past 3-4 years. But if I go on the French side, I will see a little more distribution. Still, Paris being very central. But clearly, when you look at the Italian case, you have this insight that can be gained. So if I go at the European level and I show major IXPs in Europe, I will say that the major IXPs in Europe are in London and in Amsterdam and in Frankfurt. So why? London and Amsterdam, you can understand it because they are close to the sea. And you need to have cable that arrive from the sea. But Paris or Milano are not far from the sea, but they are not seen as major internet exchange points. And Frankfurt, that is far from the sea, is still a major internet exchange point. And when you get into the detail, you figure out that all in all, it's the result of the strategy of the major actor of communication. Back in the day that they had a kind of most European country, you had a monopolistic approach to the telecommunication market. And for example, in France and Italy, it was more beneficial for the telecommunication company to get money from the customer that are getting data. For example, in France, in Marseille, you see here in the, if I show you there, you see the cable are arriving in France there. In Italy, they are arriving there. So if you want to process the data there, you have to take this data and transport it all the way up to there, or take the data there and transport it up to there. And it was more beneficial for the telco to make customer paying for this transport, to push for the existence of processing close to the cable. So it's clearly a strategic decision of operator and government that have shaped this situation. So here you get into a very interesting area of activity and research that is more on the geography side. How can we define, how can we update territory planning? And how can we update regional economy through the existence of internet infrastructure? And indeed, in this context, maps are very useful. Let's go to the second case study, which is a little more, you will see there is a lot of interesting stuff there. Indeed, the connectivity between Europe and Asia is a very important connectivity. In Asia, you have China, you have Japan, you have Korea, Singapore, a lot of countries, and Europe need to have a lot of exchange with them. And when we say this connectivity is important, we need to have a low-risk connectivity that is reliable, first of all, meaning that we need high-speed and reliable paths. Low delay is very important. They said that 10 milliseconds of delay is $100 million turnover for a high-frequency trading company. So having low delay is very important. Having paths that have physical reliability, meaning that there is no cable that are cut by accident, is important. And you should also have a network reliability, meaning that you have not at the network level into the protocol of routing of network, change of routing that happen permanently. So what is called Bgp flaps. On another hand, you have more and more awareness of surveillance risk. And we know that on the path between Europe to Asia, there is major spot of surveillance. And we need also this path to be secure, meaning to not cross countries or autonomous systems that are known to be dangerous and that enter into problematic activities or mafia activities. So, for showing you the analysis, I'm going to go directly to the real-time map. So I'm moving out of my slides, and we are going to see the map. 1 second. Let me go to this is a website that gives you the map of all maritime cable, and you can zoom and so. You can wonder why do we have the map of all maritime cable? Because these maritime cable are in open water or in international water, and you should know where the cable are to make sure that the ship is not dropping his anchor at this place. So this transparency is happening because of practical constraints. Because out of these countries would love to have all of this hidden. So let's look at this map, and I'm going to be interested about the path from Asia to Europe. So you see a lot of cable there. I'm going to make a zoom to have a better view. If you look there, you will see that all the cable that come from Asia, so Korea, Japan, China, go all, they concentrate all there. Do anybody have an idea what is there? Singapore. If you just sit in Singapore on the Malacca Strait, 80% of internet traffic from Europe to Asia is just going under your feet. And you can ask, so why Singapore? have been able to do this. Indeed, there was the geographical position of Singapore, but also some kind of fiscal and a strategic incentive that they give beginning of 90s. For example, they make Singtel, the Singapore operator, they make him mandatory to open his premises to any competitor. So Singtel was not able to say that, no, I'm not going to give access to my network to competitors. And this generates the fact that a lot of cables go through Singapore. And it shows also the importance of Singapore for all actors that exist in this region. So if I continue the path, I will say that I get in India here there is a big connection point. That is, by the way, I will explain later that most of this network is operated by Tata, not because Tata own them, but it's operated by Indian engineers because they are cheap. And you have there most of this cable arriving in this region. This region is Fujairah there, and Fujairah is in the United Arab Emirates. It's on the Indian Sea side, and this point is very important from the perspective of surveillance, because not only the traffic from Asia to Europe cross it, but also the traffic from Middle East to Europe come from this pass. So something like 60% of the traffic from Middle East goes through Fujairah, and indeed Fujairah become quite interesting for surveillance perspective. In Snowden Revolution, Fujairah is called Falcon Landing. Let's continue our path. You get here at Djibouti, another choke point. And you understand why France has a major naval basis in Djibouti, and why China has very recently opened its first naval base out of the China Sea in Djibouti. The problem is that in Djibouti the sea is deep, so the cable are 2,000 meters down. They are not easy to access. While if you continue a little further, there you get into the channel, the Suez Channel, and here you have 40 meters of deepness. So for example, in the past couple of years, we had tourists that cut cable in this region. And when you look at the tourists, you will see that these tourists were coming to do fishing in the Red Sea, which is a very nice place to do fishing. But when you look at where these tourists were coming, you figure out that these tourists were coming from this side of the Red Sea, this side of Sinai, in this very narrow place there. So there were tourists on order. So people that wanted to get access to the cable did a mistake, so cable was cut. And if you continue right there, you end up with cable that arrive in Sicily, in Italy, and mainly in France. So this is, if I want to understand the risk that exists on connectivity between Asia and Europe, I have to understand the risk that exists in these different points. And just by making this on the map, you can begin to see where are the important points and where are the risks that exist. Now, let's make it a little more interesting. I'm going to unzoom the map, and I'm going to make it there. So, if you want to connect China to Europe, what is other potential paths that exist? So, indeed, you know that maps are not showing the real distance. The shortest real distance between Asia to Europe is going through the pole. So there is a very short path there that goes there. And interestingly, there's no cable. If you go on the other side, you will see that, oh, there's cable there. But here there's no cable. In fact, this part also you have no cable, but mainly because most of this region is under ice. But here you have a pass that is more and more frequently open, which is going there, and there should be a cable going there. If I was showing you this map 3 years ago, you would see indeed a cable project there. But it has disappeared from 3 years ago. Why it has disappeared? Because the main stakeholder of this cable was Russia. And Russia killed the project. Why? Because there is another pass that is obvious, going through Russia. So the land pass is much better. So one potential pass is the land pass through Russia. I'm going to discuss about it a little further. Another pass that exists there is a pass that will follow the maritime pass of Silk Road, because Silk Road used to have 3 passes. One pass was the South Pass. So South Pass was going through Turkey, Iran, getting there into ship, and after that crossing the west by ship, which is the maritime pass. There was another pass that was going through Turkey, Iran, Turkmenistan, the Taklamakan desert, and getting to China. And there was another one that was going a little further on the north and going on the other side of Pamir and getting to China. So the South Pass is still possible, and there is a pass that can go through, cable goes through there, and they arrive here in Oman. They cross Oman, they cross the Indian Sea there, they get into Iran, they cross Iran, they get into Azerbaijan, and they get into Russia, and after that to Ukraine and Europe. This cable exists, it's called IPEC. It's a cable that has been inaugurated 5 years ago, and nowadays it's the lowest delay pass that is available. But this pass is a kind of geopolitical nightmare. Because you cross the sea, you get into Iran, you get into Azerbaijan, you get into Russia, and after that to Europe. You get into Ukraine, and you get into Europe after. So, but if you are a company doing high frequency trading, you have no way out of this. So on one hand, you can say that, oh, crossing Iran means Iran is under American embargo, so an American company cannot use this. Indeed. But everybody is using it because it's hidden under layers of contract and so on. Nobody knows that the packets are going through Iran. So let's look at other possible passes. So if I want to connect this part of the world to Europe, what are the other potential paths that exist? Saudi Arabia used to have a very important cable project that was connecting cable from there, going through Jordani, Syria, getting into Turkey, and in Turkey getting connected to European network. And this pass that is now, this project that is now abandoned, I will explain why, was crossing a nice city that used to be nice, somewhere there, because the map was going there, that was named Raqqa. So Raqqa is directly on the path of the cable project between Saudi Arabia and Europe. And the UAE had also another project that was connecting through Kuwait and Iraq and going there, getting to Turkey. And this pass was crossing the Kurdish Valley, the second Kurdish Valley, the one that voted for independence recently. So you can just see by looking at cable paths, I have a potpourri of all geopolitical issues that exist in the contemporary world that are appearing. And you see the interaction between a simple question that is a very technical question. Where should my cable go and which path I should take to have the lowest risk? And you get into a lot of geopolitics from the beginning. So this is one element that explains how the looking at cyberspace as embedded into the geography is useful. So I'm going to show you a last map that I like very much. It is called From Gulag to Data Centers. So I show you the terrestrial Russian cable that exists. So the terrestrial Russian cable goes from there. It followed the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and you have a lot of investment that are made these days in, they are investing a lot in data centers and in computer infrastructures there, because first of all it's Siberia, so the weather is cold, you have not to pay a lot for cooling the stuff, but there is also some other reason. So we superpose on the map of the cable pass and the map of the investment that are made. The investment that are made are this blue square, and I have round a half circle that are existing electric dam, hydroelectric dams. So you see that all of this blue are close to hydroelectric dam. I superpose to it the position of old Gulag camp, and there are the hashed region. And you see a perfect match. This is why I call this map From Gulag to Data Center. Now, if you get a little more into detail there, you will see a region here that is around the city named Ekaterinburg, and there are some yellow points there. So these yellow points are called the position of old scientific cities in Russia. So there were cities that used to have no address, they had just postcode, and scientists were living in these cities. And you see, in particular, one region of interest there. There was a big dam, 3 major data centers, and 2 Sigma city, 2 scientific cities close to it. 90% of BGP hijack and large-scale internet hijack activity come from this, inside this city. So just by putting this on the map, you already have a kind of very interesting geopolitical analysis that come out of this. I could continue this by looking at, for example, the project of the new Silk Road that is made by China, and you will see that all the potential passes that are currently being taken are passes that are coupled with internet connectivity. So let's go to the next dimension, which is geography embedded in cyberspace. So I said that more and more the world is projecting itself into the cyberspace, and we have an issue of intermediation. We have not an issue, but the major source of added value these days in economy is intermediation, meaning transforming data that come from the real world from one format to another format and making money out of this transfer. So I'm going to show you some example of geography embedded in cyberspace. I'm going to drop this and explain you one study that we did 3 years ago, two year and a half ago. My colleague in Chinese Academy of Science come to me and said that we have a huge trace that contain 2 days of all DNS activity in China for a major operator having 20% of market share. So for 2 days, I had records saying every Chinese 20% of the market was going to which website and was searching which address. So they come to me and said that, what can we do with this data that can be useful? So when we begin to look at the data, we figure out that there is a lot of security related thing, but we wanted to be still friends with our Chinese colleague and we don't want to have them to have issues and problems. So we tell them that there is this security stuff, we are not going to look at that. Let's think about something that is interesting for both of us. And we ended up looking at the advertising market in China. Why? Because indeed money is important for internet and most of the money of internet come from advertising. So this is a first map that we built, and indeed it shows the amount of traffic that is generated, the amount of requests that are generated in China and remain in China. Indeed, most of Chinese people go to Chinese websites, so a large part of the traffic remain in China. There is a small proportion that goes to US. But when you look at the advertisement market, it's striking. We're not expecting this because China is a country that is having a kind of very, very nationalistic view and a very cyber sovereignty position. So we're not expecting to see 81% of advertisement requests going to US. So we presented this paper in a conference. 2 months after, my colleague in Chinese Academy of Science were contacted by the Chinese government. Said that, can you come and give the same presentation in the government? And 3 weeks after the presentation, most of this blue part was filtered. What struck me is the speed of reaction, 5 weeks. And they do not send it to the government themselves. The government figure out that there is a paper about this that can be interesting for them. We can say everything about China, and I completely agree about a lot of issues, democratic issues and so on. But their reactivity and the way that they look at issues that exist as strategic issues is something that is, it takes me 20-something years to begin to interact with political people in France. I have the feeling that when I go in China, it's much easier. Now, for example, having a full DNS trace from Europe, all of the researchers that are working on these topics are dreaming of this for 20 years. In China, I have the feeling that I have more information about the Chinese internet, Chinese network than the European. So let me give you another example of how internet information give you some information about what's happening on the ground. So we're interested about the evolution of internet in Georgia and Azerbaijan. So we decided to calculate the delay that you need to get from Georgia to other places in the world, in the neighboring countries, and from Azerbaijan, that is a country that is just through the same places. And we observed that, the green point there are places that are very close to Georgia, and red point are pointed that are very far. So Georgia is much closer to Bulgaria than to Russia and even Azerbaijan, while Azerbaijan is very close to Russia and is very far from Bulgaria. So it shows you some aspect how internet distorts the geography, and how by looking at the cyber geography I can have information about what's happening really on the ground. and I'm going to get into more detail later. So let's talk about the last element, which is cyberspace as a space on its own. So let me describe you what is BGP, because it's the main thing that I'm going to discuss about. So internet is a network of networks, and all networks that constitute the internet are called AS, autonomous system. So an autonomous system is a set of routers and communication link that are managed by an independent authority, and they can decide how to do traffic exchange inside their network. So BGP is based on voluntary announcement by each node that if you want to go somewhere else, you can cross me, but they will make this announcement only if there is a benefit for them. So it's a very much economic and political constraint based announcement. So we I'm going to drop this, and we have what is called AS graph. So AS graph says how the different components of internet, meaning the different ASs, are connected to each other. For example, this AS that is AT&T is connected to these other ASs that are represented by numbers. So each number is another operator, some of them being in the other countries. And you end up with having a graph that describes how these different elements are connected. So if I want to represent internet as a space on its own, I have to represent this graph. So first question that you can ask is, let's suppose that I am a French operator. And as a French operator, I have some other operator that are my neighbor. I can exchange directly information with them. What is the nationality of my neighbors? Who are my neighbors? So we decided to make what is called an anamorphose. So an anamorphose is one map where the neighbor are proportional to their real size, not the geographical size. And we figure out that, for example, the anamorphose of France is that US is quite large compared to other neighbors. And in fact, 30% of French neighborhood is US. If I want to, I want to know how much the 5 A's, which is the 5 countries that have agreement with US about surveillance, have neighborhood with France. 47% of French neighborhood is 5 A's countries.
Please repeat the definition of neighborhood.
So neighborhood is the nationality of the other ASs that you are in direct connection
You are
with them.
counting the number of autonomous systems,
Yes.
not the amount of traffic.
No, I'm just counting
Only
the number of
autonomous
autonomous, because the amount of traffic is one of these hidden information that nobody wants to talk about. So for doing this kind of study, we built a BGP monitoring system. So a BGP monitoring system is something that look at 35 points in the world, receive all announcement, all routing announcement, gather them. You get something like 500,000 announcements per minute. You gather them, and you build an AS graph like this that I showed there, but a whole AS graph for the whole internet each minute. So my BGP monitoring platform is able to get at each minute of time how the different operators were interconnected to each other and how it changed over time. So an example of an announcement is something like that. It says that RRC10, which is a RIPE connector that I think is positioned in Brazil, is getting a message that is saying that if you want to access to this prefix, yes, 107, 102, this, if you want to access this prefix, you can go through me, and this is the path that you will follow to reach to the destination. So we take this announcement, we augment them, and we add the country that they belong. For example, if we said that this is South Africa, this is US, this is Brazil, this is Colombia. So for going from South Africa to an operator, to an address in Brazil, you are crossing a South African operator, an American operator, a Colombian operator, and 2 Brazilian operators to get there. And we also augment this by having the name of the different operator. And we store each minute such a graph. So I'm going to show you one of these graphs. So this is the places that I need to have Gephi, and this was why I wanted to have my computer. So here is Gephi. So let me open one graph. So that you can see. Yes. So this is each minute a snapshot of internet, and this is the situation of network yesterday. So I end up with a network that contains 69,000 node and 191,000 link. So at the beginning, this is something that is quite, cannot see anything. We have implemented the visualization method that is for class 2. We have changed an existing method, and I'm going to show you. So in order to have a view about what is happening, I'm going to show you the different countries. I'm going to make a palette with 80 node. Okay, let's apply this. And you are seeing the graph beginning to show itself. So you have 26% of node that are in US. And you see Brazil, which is the green part, Russia is there, Poland is there, Ukraine, Germany is there, Great Britain is into this middle, Ukraine is very close to Russia. And so this graph in fact show me the kind of evolution of the internet, and I have one snapshot of this each minute, so I can know how the relationship are changing. Now you can wonder, what's the usage of this, and what can I do with this, and what kind of insight I can get from this. I'm going to zoom in one area of interest. So the area of interest that I'm going to zoom in is the Ukraine-Russia zone. So I'm going to see how Ukrainian and Russian operator are connected to each other. So this graph shows the relationship between Ukrainian and Russian operator. Ukrainian are in green and Russian are in blue. 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So you see there is a big block of Ukrainian and Russian, and they are connected somewhere there. If I do the same exercise from 2 years ago, I will see this. So what's the change? You see one region, one part that is getting separated from Ukraine and getting close to Russia with a mix of green and when you get deep into it, you will see that it's Crimea. So Crimea getting separated. And if I look the same thing on the map of yesterday, this is Crimea. This is the separatist Donbass region. And for me, it's very talking. It just shows that Donbass is beginning to get separate. And this move has begun 6 months ago. 6 months ago, this part was there. So there is a drift that is beginning to happen. So it shows me stuff that are happening in the ground in advance. So indeed, there is a lot of maths inside in building these graphs and representing it, and so. And this is the part where multidisciplinarity become very important, because there is a lot of mathematical aspect about this. For example, something that we did was that we defined a measure of influence. So by influence, I look at each node in the graph and I see how many of these neighbors are from another country. And if I look at the influence, this graph will be colored like that. So in the context of influence, you used to have the influence of three regions. Let me make also a palette with 80 color there. So you see three major area of influence some years ago in Ukraine. You have this pink one that is Transtelecom, that is indeed Russia. You had this blue one that is Cogent, so American influence, and you had this that is another influence, another American network influence. If I look at this at different time, I can see how the influence of different countries are changing. So, is this
a technical communication? I apologize, I have to go for family reasons. I knew that this was going to be an amazing talk, and this is truly thrilling. So I will watch the last half an hour, the video recording of it, because it's absolutely mesmerizing. So sorry for the interruption. Thank you so much. It was really, I didn't know actually you were doing this kind of work. Super interesting. Very, very interesting.
Thank you very much. I would like to have really your insights later. Absolutely. We can discuss it.
I also want to get the slides, your papers and everything, because it's really interesting. I leave in the good hands of the rest of the gang, particularly Antonio, who also will take care of you after the meeting. Just remember that at 8 o'clock sharp we always end, so calibrate your... It
will be ending in 5 minutes.
Oh, excellent.
So because I need to have also some time for questions.
Excellent. Wonderful. So thank you again, Kavé.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful to have you here.
Sure.
Antonio, posso dire una cosa velocissima?
So, I'm almost ready to get to the conclusion. If this wants to move away, how can I get it to move? 1 second. Yes. Let's move it this way. Yes. And now I can. So, I had some slide talking about the Chinese cyber strategy and Russian cyber strategy, but it needs longer time indeed. Conclusion. So, this presentation I show you the three different frameworks of representing cyberspace. One cannot understand cyber strategy without understanding position in cyberspace. And cyber strategy is a major component of a larger picture that exists. There is a new science emerging, network internet science, and cyber strategy is indeed a major component of it. The issue is that it's multidisciplinary, and multidisciplinarity is tough. I want to take 2-3 minutes to emphasize about the toughness of multidisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity is tough because different communities have different jargon, different language, different definition. But still, if you put a geopolitician and a network scientist in the same office, and they begin to talk with each other, they can find fascinating insight. And this presentation is the result of such an insight. We had made from some years ago in France, initially there was this Castex chair of cyber strategy that was in the French High Institute of Defense Study. And nowadays it's transformed into a research group named GEOD, that is in the French Institute of Geopolitics, that is multidisciplinary. And we do a lot of work together. And after some years, now we are in the situation that we have the right set of people that can understand the language of themselves. Because me as a computer scientist, I cannot go and see the situation in Ukraine and begin to have an understanding about that. And the geopoliticians do not know that there is these tools that exist. Something that is fascinating there is that this kind of change that are happening, once upon a time, it was just intelligence service that had people on the ground and were able to figure out. But now, because you had to announce this connectivity information, it's a lot of information that everybody can gather if he has the willingness and the interest to do it. So there is a lot of benefit in doing this interdisciplinary research. But it's tough because we have completely separate disciplines, and these disciplines are very difficult to interact. They have their own tradition. For example, a political scientist might do his PhD thesis on election in South Uganda and do his whole career understanding election in this region of the world. While a computer scientist will publish can publish 6 papers a year, and the expectation that you have on a computer science student to graduate will be that you have 3, 4, 5 papers. Political science, if you have 1 or 2 papers in a good journal, it's more than enough. It's a great thesis. Philosophy, you will expect that his thesis become a book. Very rarely thesis in computer science become a book. And even if our institution are all speaking about multidisciplinarity, but really they are not putting the real effort on it. For example, having a PhD student that is in both domains is difficult because the PhD student at the end, he will not be seen as a computer scientist by the computer science, and he will not be seen, for example, a geopolitician by the geopolitics department. Meaning that doing multidisciplinary research is a very, very risky for PhD students and people at the beginning of their career. I will say that in my case,
in the middle of the career, yes.
In my case, I will have that reaching my age, I have the luxury of doing multidisciplinary research. And I have the luxury of even not speaking about these topics in my normal CV, because it will just blur my profile. And I'm lucky to have enough scientific activity in my core domain. But multidisciplinarity is very tough. And the major outcome of several years of multidisciplinary research, the main added value, is in fact not the work that you have done, not these maps and everything, but just finding and educating the right set of people that can interact with each other. This is the main outcome. The fact that if I want to talk about, for example, ethics, there is this philosopher that at least will understand what I'm speaking about. And the philosopher having a computer scientist that is able to explain him in simple terms what is deep learning. For my computer science colleagues, try to explain what is deep learning to your grandmother. If she understands, it will be much more easy to explain it to your grandmother. Eventually, some of us can have grandmother that have a PhD in computer science. I'm putting these outliers out of the picture. But explaining this to a philosopher is much more difficult, because the philosopher have already his view about what is the meaning of intelligence, what is the meaning of learning, what is the meaning of human psyche and everything. And now you have to translate your technical description into something that you can understand. But on another hand, multidisciplinarity is exciting because you do this translation job. And I give this presentation as a computer scientist, But I'm pretty sure that if somebody specialist in geopolitics heard it, he will get a lot of insight from it. Because the outcome of several years of working with geopoliticians has been knowing and learning how to translate the problem of, for example, delay measurement or Bgp graph into something that they can understand and they can deal with. And they have done also a lot of effort into transforming their discourse into something that they can understand. This ends my presentation. Thank you very much for having me there. Fortunately, Juan Carlos had to leave, but I wanted also to thank him in particular for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here. If you have any question, I'm ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much. I turn on the light. So I can lead the discussion by collecting questions, if there are some, by the audience, and then maybe I can give my questions too.
There's a lot of food to think and to digest. And congratulations for the work. This is pretty awesome. And so, as I said, maybe many more questions would come later at the dinner because I'm pretty slow.
Sometimes what you eat is helpful for asking questions.
Yes, but when you speak about multidisciplinarity, well, this is a place where we try to do this kind of work and this stuff. And so I told you he's a philosopher,
yes,
and a software engineer, and it takes quite a lot of time to...
Oh, we have an anthropologist.
Exactly. The same is, I'm experiencing it, the same is at the other center I'm working in, which is the Future Urban Legacy Lab. Although over there they are all engineers, incredibly is even more tough, because engineering is really vertical. And sometimes we spend hours just around one word. When we speak about multidisciplinarity, I think very often to that area of knowledge which was the studies of Wiener. It's called Norbert Wiener.
Yes.
Now I'm pretty tired and I don't remember the name.
Cybernetics.
I know exactly what
Cybernetics.
Cybernetics. Yes.
Cybernetics.
And well, I found I really love that work. And sometimes I think that, however, we lost that, at least partially we lost that approach to knowledge, because Wiener put together people from medical sciences, psychologists, computer scientists, etc., etc., etc.
But may I ask you, because we have few people.
My question was if you think that we lost that approach, or
this is a very important question. That is kind of meta question that exists, which is that academic institution and academic structure, all social structures that evolve over time, and looking at the evolution of the social structures is by itself fascinating. How the scientific discourse has changed from, let's say, 15th century to now. In 15th century, we used to have a lot of multidisciplinary humanists. You know, you have people
in
like
one
Leonardo.
person, in one person, because
In one person.
every
And nobody is asking wondering about the expertise or the excellence of Leonardo da Vinci, that was at the same time an engineer and at the same time a painter and at the same time, or you have a lot of this type of people in Oriental history, people like Avicenna or so. We still have this type of people in 19th century. But our institution and the history of our institution, and I will say the social history and the political history of an institution, goes toward completely killing this kind of expertise. You know, the search for excellence in one domain and the search for publication in one domain and the publish or perish, in fact, killed completely this. And these days, looking at one problem that is marginally related to this, but this is quite similar. Now, when you are in a domain, for example, you are in networking, and you look at the conferences that exist in the domain, you see that the people that are organizing conference, the people that are in the TPC of conference, have a lot of power. They have the power to shape the domain of research in their domain for the coming years. Because students that are going to begin their PhD thesis next year, they are going to see these papers that are accepted. And now, if you look at the problem not as, is this paper good or not? You look at it as a power struggle, you will see that it's very easy to get into a very political and very dictatorial power situation by a group of people that will get power in one domain and will continue to publish the same type of paper that they are writing and same language and same thing. Multidisciplinarity is a way of getting out of this loop, and is a way indeed, from my perspective, is a political action, more than just being a scientific action. If we want to get out of the structure that our institution want to jail us into, we have to do multidisciplinarity. And it's, from my perspective, a very activist position in the scientific domain. Indeed, some people will say, and I'm completely okay with that, and I agree with that, that you should always separate activism with science. But I'm in favor of activism in science, and not mixing activism with science. But activism in science means to have the curiosity of putting yourself under question by having the view of another discipline on what you do. And this is a kind of very, from my perspective, a political activism.
Maybe I ask our guest if she has any question, because the rest of the people here come from Nexa, so we have the possibility of talking to Professor Salamatian also later, but maybe for you it's...
Oh, well, I'm here because a friend of mine told me, and okay, it's something that I really just need to. And about this discourse about multidisciplinary course is what I think is that it's difficult because one should have a sort of license, a sort of passport between disciplinary. I don't know if it's clear. And so speaking together is somehow difficult because you should have a license to say something, and to say something in different it's very difficult, I think. And in my case, I'd like to study urban stuff, and the urban has got lots of lines, and from the sociological perspective, you can see something, and from the engineering and architecture or others, and so speaking together is always very difficult. And I don't know about the first question that I can have about what we said is how cybergeography and cyberspace can have influences on microscale activities and, for example, transportation, because I think that all of these discourses influences the perceptions of distances and of what we actually do every day. And,
so, there is two elements to your question. The first one is the toughness of discussing with each other. Yes, this is tough. I will add one more element that make it tougher. Is the question of respect. Now, indeed, everybody that get out of university get out with an undergrad license degree or a master degree and so on. But different disciplines have a tendency of sometimes making themselves stronger by making other lower. Now, a lot of cases, for example, engineers have this tendency of saying that we are doing hard science and the other people on the other side are doing soft science. Or on the other side, sometimes people coming from humanities would say that you are not understanding the complexity of stuff, and you just simplify stuff and make it. The question of respect, from my perspective, is a fundamental element that is coming out of not interacting with each other, of not having structures that push us to have respect. For example, now we are here in Politecnico, a very nice engineering school and a very nice. I'm pretty sure that most of the students almost never get out of their building and go to the next building. And eventually the only reason that you might go to the next building is that there is a nice cafeteria. Or sometimes is that the girl in the other department are more beautiful, or the boy in the other department are more beautiful. I think that this is something that we really need, and this was the concept of campus has been invented for that, for enabling different people from different disciplines to interact more with each other. We need to make this more mandatory and to have more curiosity. And generating this curiosity is also our job. Now, for me, it's so easy to speak with the mathematical language and write equation. I can do it. I can just make this presentation that I did with a lot of equation in a very mathematical way, because it's the way that I've been educated. But making the exercise and putting some pressure on myself to not use any formula in my presentation is in fact a way of showing my respect to the people that are participating in my presentation. One issue that we have frequently on internet issues these days is that journalists are the main people that are having a voice in this domain. We want to talk about net neutrality. You invite a journalist. You will talk about algorithmic regulation. You ask journalists. Why are we not asking from people that are knowledgeable about? Because we have a complex language. And we need to work on our communication abilities. And all of this goes back into the question of respect. The case that you say that you should have a license to say something in another domain is because you have the feeling, and it's not an unjustified feeling, that if you do a mistake, you will be burned by the other discipline. And this is the question of respect that comes. Why? It's just normal for everybody to do mistakes. And we are doing mistake when we are thinking about some stuff that is not in our area of expertise. So having this is now I come to the more direct question that you're asking me. How cyber and the small scale are interacting with each other. There's a lot of interaction. The first interaction is that all in all, the humanity have evolved into having interaction with its environment. It was much more easy for the human to know the people that were close to them than to know the people that were far from them. And this is the reason also that language evolved in very local idioms or accent and so on. Nowadays, internet enable you to interact more easily with somebody that is far from you than interact with somebody that is close to you. Sometimes we give this as a caricature that two students are in the same room and they are chatting with each other over internet and they are not speaking with each other. It's also the result of the fact that chatting is more easy than speaking. Now, it shows how cyber issues are interacting with very local issues. But at the same time, it shows the huge risk that it happens. The risk is that you are losing your ground by just interacting too much with far away people. You are losing something that is fundamental from my perspective, which is the ability to interact with the real. If I go a little further, it should be a topic of another talk, but I was teaching this year as a computer scientist first time. I had to teach a course on digital sociology. It's a long story why I had to teach this course. So the first question that I began to ask myself was, what's the meaning of digital? Sociology is a topic that exists, and what's the meaning of digital? And my interpretation of digital is the following, and it's very relevant to the question that you're asking, is that humanity have played for a long time with a trade-off between cooperation and contact with reality. When human invented language, it was a huge cooperation tool. But using language, you lose something. Why? When I speak about an apple, I have in my mind a red apple, you have in your mind a green apple, but both of us understand what's happening. So conceptualizing the apple enables us to interact on apple and to talk about the abstract concept of apple pie. But I am losing by doing this the personal experience of the apple pie of my grandmother that is different from the apple pie that you go and buy from the shop. So there is this trade-off between grasping the reality and interacting and cooperating. Digital so at the beginning you had language, writing was another step into this. Before that, everybody was saying the same story in different way. And now you have only one written. Printing was even more generating this. And now we have getting to the digital world, where we have the ability of completely lose any contact with reality and be completely overwhelmed into the virtual world. And you are in a situation that for a lot of concepts nowadays, what is happening locally is not anymore relevant. What is happening globally is relevant. You know, you can say people that migrant is a major issue. Even if in their village they have never seen a migrant, they have never seen anybody, but they will be afraid because some people on the other side of the world or the other side of the country are saying something. So it's not an answer to a question, but it's some element.
Anyway, before you talked about the metaphor of the Aleph, and,
Yes.
so the Aleph could be applied to our question because
Exactly.
because I don't know if you have ever read the Aleph. No, it's a tale. I read it from Borges,
Yes.
Jorge Luis Borges, but maybe it's older. Anyway, at very different scales, you can use these techniques to say something about space and geography, and it's very interesting. Your question is very interesting also for us because we want to make a research about inequalities in society, and we have to represent inequalities, and your technique is fantastic for representing inequalities. And for example, transportation is a small topic which may reveal many inequalities in society. And
Something that is fascinating me is that for us it's much more easy to go and talk about the society of autochthone in a Brazilian forest than to speak about our community of research.
yeah,
And there is I have not seen so many research working on the social relationship and the political relationship into the research and into different disciplines. What's the politics of discipline? There are some work, but not enough compared to what it is needed.
anyway, I would have many questions for you, but we have to close the recording
Yes.
of this meeting because, as Juan Carlos said before, we stop at 8
At
o'clock.
8, we are at 8.
8 o'clock, and so we are at 8. So thank you very much again for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a
And
pleasure.
you should come back because we want to know everything about the development of your researches.
I told that the most important insight, the most important takeaway of multidisciplinary research is to find a set of people that you can interact with.
Yeah. So let's interact, but let's also meet because
Sure.
because interacting from the distance is not enough.
No.
Yeah.
You know,